Aloha. Welcome to Finding Your Piece of the Rock on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Abe Lee. I have been a real estate licensee since 1973, which is a long time. I started Abe Lee seminars in 1980. I've had the privilege of teaching over 10,000 real estate students in trying to get their real estate license. I've taught additional thousands of agents in continuing education classes to maintain their license every 2 years. The purpose of our course or seminar today is to help you to understand the process that's involved in a real estate transaction, especially for the buyers. Our special guests will talk about legal issues, escrow, title, getting a loan, surveys, home inspections, contracts, wills and trusts, and much, much more. My special guest today is Bob Schneider, an esteemed, knowledgeable, and experienced real estate attorney. Okay, Bob is a senior partner with Schneider, Tanaka, Radovich, Andrew, and Tanaka. That's a mouthful. Okay, Bob will be discussing the various topics regarding buying real estate and the role of the attorney in the real estate buying process. So, Bob, thank you so much for being with us today.
Abe, thank you. Appreciate being here.
Okay, before we get to the topic at hand, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, what school you went to, and how you got into real estate or law, and what made you get into real estate law.
Well, I grew up here in Hawaii, and I'm proud to say that I started my education at Holy Nativity School, which is a great place to be and go to school. And then I went to Punahou School and on to Williams College. Graduated from Williams where it was too cold, so I headed west and went to law school at the University of the Pacific. And after that, I came home and worked with a large firm. And about 20 years ago, we started Schneider Tanaka. As Abe said, it's a mouthful. We call it Strat. We started Strat, and it's worked out very well. It's a relatively small group of real estate attorneys, and we also do business work. My partner, Todd Tanaka, is an excellent business attorney, and we work well together, the business and the real estate. And we do all aspects of real estate: buying, selling, developing, condominium work, financing, which is a large part of what I do, and we enjoy it.
Well, thank you very much. Let's discuss some of the topics that are of importance for a buyer when they are in the process of buying real estate. So the first question I have, Bob, is when someone is buying a home, is it helpful for the buyer to consult with an attorney?
I think it can be very helpful, but with one qualifier. It's hard to get a straight answer out of attorneys, but one important qualifier, and that is, I think an attorney can be very helpful to a buyer, but it has to be the right attorney. And by that, I mean a real estate attorney, someone who is experienced, knows the process of buying and selling. And I also think it's important for the buyer to have a real estate attorney that they can communicate with, they're comfortable with. And I think that means that it's good for the buyer to plan it out, check out an attorney or two, and in advance of the buy-sell process, and have someone ready to go that's accessible and that you can work with. And I think that under those circumstances, a real estate attorney can be very helpful to the buyer.
Also, I would ask that maybe a brand new law school graduate may not be the right fit because they don't have enough experience. They're kind of they're wet behind the ears, so to speak.
No, that's a good point. And the thing is, it's almost counterintuitive that a more experienced attorney knows the documentation, can get in and get out, and because of that, it's more cost effective. And on that subject, if you're a buyer and you're looking for an attorney, don't hesitate to ask for an estimate of the cost, so that one could budget that in.
Sure. Okay, so now what would attorneys do for the buyer? And at what point should the buyer's attorney participate in the buy-sell process? When is it too late?
I think there are three specific areas where an attorney can be very helpful. And the first area is really at the very beginning. And that is, I think it's important for the attorney to look at the offer. And that's really step one. Um, it's a printed form, and a lot of people think, oh, it's a printed form. There can't be anything in it that's important. And that's just not true. Yes, it's a printed form, but it's loaded with legalese and all sorts uh, of legal issues that do come up. And I think at that early stage, the attorney can be very helpful. Um, and as Abe suggests, if you bring an attorney in after the contract is signed, the deal is struck. And at that point, it's much harder to make changes.
Hmm.
And the other point is if you make an offer, oftentimes the seller will make a counter offer. And that too is very important for the attorney to take a look at because the sellers can try to slip in all kinds of things in lots of different ways. And you just have to be on your toes.
Okay, how about the title report and documents that affect the title? How does that play into the process?
Yes. Yeah. As I said, there's sort of three main areas. The first one is the offer and any counter offer. The second one is the title report. And when I say title report, I mean the title report and all the documents, legal documents that are referenced in it. What happens is when you sign the contract, escrow is open, and the first thing the escrow does is they'll order this title report, and it gets sent around to the parties. And at that point, it's important for the attorney to take a look at it. If you're buying a condominium, all the recorded condominium documents are there, and they should be checked, especially just to make sure they're in order. I'm not suggesting there's always a problem there, but just to double check it. Especially in a smaller condo, 2 or 3 units, some of those provisions can be unique, and it's good to just double check it. And also for the buyer to be mindful of what's in there, what it says, because there can be some unique aspects of it that you may not anticipate. Um, if you're buying a single family home, it's also important for different reasons. Oftentimes, easements with third parties who have rights to use portions of your property. You should be very much aware of that. Common driveways can get into all kinds of issues, parking, maintenance. And, again, these things are brought out by the title report. And there could be responsibilities, obligations, drainage ditches with liabilities, all kinds of things. And it's just good to have it checked, and a good real estate attorney can explain it to the buyer.
Yeah, how about the deed that should be delivered to the buyer at closing? What is that about?
Yes, that's really the third area, and that's at the end, is the deed. And by then everybody's ready to close. And sometimes, again, people aren't paying much attention, but the deed is very important. The deed is the evidence of the buyer's ownership, and that's what you take away and move forward with. Um, and one of the problems with the deed is it's a very old-fashioned, or the language is very old-fashioned and lots of confusing terms. Literally, some go back to the Middle Ages. So it's good to have it checked. The first question that comes up is what type of deed? There's what's called a warranty deed, which is a full warranty. Buyers like it because they get more protections from the promises from the seller. Sellers don't like it for that reason. But then there's also a limited warranty where the buyer gets fewer warranties. Seller likes that. So, these things, that does vary. And it's interesting because the purchase contract really doesn't make it clear what type of deed shall be used. It just says a deed with warranty. So these things are in play. And I think it's a good idea if you're a buyer, frankly, to put a one-liner on the offer. Nobody pays any attention that it'll be a warranty deed. And at the end, it should be a warranty deed. And the other thing that comes up with the deed is that what's called the tenancy.
Hmm.
And the tenancy is basically the way in which title is held. There are some options, and it's important to make sure that the type of tenancy that you end up with, fits your circumstance. If you're an individual, it's pretty simple. It's called tenant in severalty, just one person, and it's pretty simple. But if it's more than one person, there are some options. For example, if it's two people and they're married, generally people go with what's called tenants by the entirety. And in this type of tenancy, there is a right of survivorship. If one of the spouses dies, the property automatically vests in the other spouse. No probate, no questions asked. It goes to that spouse. And that can be, very important. The other thing about a tenancy by the entirety is, and this, I think this is very important, and that is that the property is only subject to the claims of the creditors of both parties. If one of the spouses has a bunch of bills or gets sued or has a problem financially, that does not affect the property because both spouses are not did not commit to that obligation. So TE has this creditor protection feature that I think is very valuable to a married couple. And then the other tenancy, if you're buying property and you're not married, you generally would go with what's called tenants in common. There's no right of survivorship if one of the, if you're buying this with your brother or sister or an investment partner, your friend down the street, if you're buying something together, tenants in common does not have the right of survivorship. If one of the people dies, it would go to his heirs, not to the other person, or whatever his will says, his or her. So tenants in common works pretty well in that situation. And there's one other one for two people or two or more. And by the way, tenants in common can be two or more. And that's called a joint tenancy. And in a joint tenancy, you're not married, so you have two or three or four, whatever number of people. But in a joint tenancy, you have to be careful and remember there is a right of survivorship. So if you die, it does not go to your kids or your heirs. It jumps to your business partner or your sister or brother. There is that right of survivorship, and there is no creditor protection, but there is the right of survivorship. Anyway, it's important to have an attorney, I think, advise you on this and make sure that the tenancy that you select is the one that you really want.
Now, in my real estate class, I teach about the 4 tenancies, and in TE, we talked about husband and wife. And by the way, in Hawaii, do we have common law, or do you have to be married legally?
Now, that's a good point. Yes, in recent years, tenants by the entirety, that the laws have changed, and if you have what's called a civil union, which in everyday language is basically marriage, same-sex marriage. In a civil union, tenancy by the entirety does apply. So in other words, it doesn't necessarily have to be a man and woman. It can be a couple in a civil union. And civil union, there's a procedure where you register with the Department of Health, state of Hawaii, and it has all of the benefits and trappings of a married couple. And then there's another arrangement called reciprocal beneficiaries, and this is something. You don't get all of the benefits of a married couple, but you get some. And it's an arrangement that, again, you have to register with the state, but it's with 2 or more people who cannot get married. It could be within the family, and for some reason, brothers and sisters want to have this right of survivorship, and there's also other benefits, hospital visitation rights, things that in a family arrangement you might want to have. Again, with people who can't get married, the civil union doesn't work. Tenancy, getting married doesn't work. but you can get some of these benefits in what's called reciprocal beneficiaries. So yes, TE can apply in broader context than just a husband or a man and woman in marriage.
Okay. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but in joint tenancy, you can have unlimited number of people. Tenancy in common, you can have unlimited number of people. But in tenancy by the entirety with husband and wife, same sex or civil marriage, and also reciprocal beneficiary, you only have two parties to that transaction.
Yes, that's
Correct?
exactly right. That's exactly
Okay.
right.
Very good. Thank you. Well, let's
And
go on to the other topics that we have because we may be running out of time, but that's okay. You're talking about estate planning attorneys. If the couple or somebody has an estate planning done, then they should look at putting the property in a trust then?
yes, and that too is important, because I've seen that before where people, have estate plans, and it's all worked out and they've spent money on it but then they don't get around to putting the property into the trust, which is the basic piece of the estate plan. So if you do have a, uh, trust, husband and wife trust, it's important to consult with your estate planner and make sure that the deed identifies the trust properly and that it's all in sync. So yes, that is another way that title can be held, and depending on your situation, it can be very worthwhile
Okay,
to go that route.
that's great. So, Bob, what advice would you give to a buyer that's going to purchase a home?
Yeah, boy, there's so much going on, and it's an interesting process with lots of people involved doing different things, and you really have to keep your wits about you. But I think one of the first things, and it can be intimidating, by the way, the whole process, especially, again, it's not something you do all the time, and yet it's a very, very important decision for a person buying a home for the first time. So I guess one of the first things I would, advice that I would give to a first time buyer would be don't hesitate to ask questions. That seems simple, but again, there are resources around you. There's an escrow officer, there's often a lender, your broker, a friend. Don't hesitate to ask questions. If something is puzzling to you, ask about it. And the second part of it, again, this seems obvious, but make sure that you get a clear answer to the question. Because again, with all these people running around and you're hearing slightly different things, make sure you go, no, wait a minute, time out. I want this explained. How is this going to work? And there's some very confusing areas, and not just for first timers. I mean, there are things that are confuse all of us. One of them is early on in the process, the seller will provide what's called the seller's disclosure statement with literally dozens of statements about the condition of the property, all aspects of it. And some of them have legal ramifications. Some of them are just condition, not just, but important conditions in terms of the state of the property. And it's very important. And a lot of times the sellers will hem and haw and, try to, not really make a clear statement. And I think it's important to ask questions. So that would be the first tip I would give. The second tip I would give would be, a really important part of this whole process is your lender, your mortgage lender. And I think that, again, before you put the offer in, before you start the process, I think it's important to talk to one or more mortgage lenders and have someone that you can that explains to you how the mortgage process works, and more importantly, the costs involved. There's a lot of upfront costs with a mortgage, and you got to make sure that your budget can accommodate these costs. And of course, all the other details of a mortgage, the interest rate, and all of that, and the timing. The loan application is at times can be overwhelming. There's all kinds of information you have to put in. So I think it's a good idea to talk to a lender early on, get that process started, and if possible, sometimes you can even get a pre-qualification letter, which it can be really helpful in a tight market when you put in your offer. If the seller knows that have your financing teed up, you you can be ahead of others in the group. So talk to the lender. That, I guess, would be the second thing I would suggest.
Okay.
And do it in advance. And the third thing, at the risk of bogging down in detail, again, as I say, that purchase contract is lengthy and loaded with legalese, and when you read it, sometimes your eyes just sort of blur over. But there's one provision in there that I think is particularly important to any buyer, especially a first-time buyer, and it's called the J1 inspection period. And basically, it is a right for the buyer during a specified period of time that gets agreed upon. There's a blank in the form. And by the way, that blank gets bantered around and people pay half attention. It's a very important blank. So we can talk about that. But for a period of time, the buyer has the right to inspect the property. And if the buyer is either uncomfortable with the property or finds something out about it that it doesn't like, doesn't work, would be too expensive to fix, the buyer has the right to cancel. And a lot of people don't pay enough attention to it. It's like a 30, 45-day period. They start, they don't pay attention. You have 2 weeks left. All of a sudden, they decide they want to start checking things out, and it's too late. So you really need to focus on it early on. I think one of the most important parts of it is to hire a home inspector and make sure you have the property checked out, because there's all kinds of things. And I'm not talking just the microwave and the oven. Structural matters, foundational matters. These things should be checked out, and they can be if you start the process early. Maybe have a home inspector teed up before the J1 period starts, and you're good to go. The other thing about the J1 period is, a lot of these things that the broker takes the lead on, or the escrow officer title. In the J1, the buyer really has to be plugged in, aware of the time frames, and coordinating the work with the inspection, maybe talking to the broker about going back on something, coordinating with the lender. The buyer really has to be very actively involved in the J1 inspection. So I would tell a buyer to focus on J1 and plan it out, talk out how much time might be needed, 30 days, 45 days. Sometimes you put in 45, the seller will come back with 15, and everyone's in a hurry and you don't pay attention. And that's, 15 days isn't very long, especially if you haven't teed up some of these people you're going to need.
Now, Bob, if someone looks at the J1 report, which I've seen, they're like 50, 70 pages, really detailed.
Yeah.
And the buyer goes, oh, no, I don't want to buy this property. If they cancel within the J1 time period, let's say it's 14 days, do they get the money back?
Yes. That's a critical piece of it. Is the buyer has to put in a deposit when the contract goes into escrow. But if you cancel, and you have to do it on time within the period, but if you timely cancel the deal pursuant to your J1 right, you get your deposit back. And that's why you got to make sure that the contract says that. Sometimes that language gets fiddled with a little bit, and you got to make sure that no questions asked, you get your deposit back if you're not satisfied as a result of your J1 inspection. And the other thing that can come up too, we kept talking about the condition of the property, which is very important. Don't misunderstand me, but during that time too, that the buyer has a much better sense of the costs involved. Not only the lending costs and the upfront costs, but maybe the ongoing costs. In your checking out the property, you realize, oh, there's a big maintenance fee for the condo, or maybe a special assessment coming up. And it's good because you need to work this into your budget and make sure that you can afford it. And because if you can't afford something, then don't hesitate to cancel. And it doesn't mean you can't buy any house. It just means maybe this one isn't for you, right, and go look for another one.
Okay, Bob, we're almost at the end of the show here, and I'm so grateful you're here. But the one other thing is on a J1 cancellation, it must be in writing, correct?
Yes, yes, and delivered to the proper place.
Yeah.
The notice
Okay.
has to be in in sync with the requirements in the contract. So that's important. Yes. And don't
Bob?
wait till the last afternoon when people do that. Everyone's in a panic.
Yeah. I wish we had more time. I think we're going to have to bring you back for an encore session because there's a
Thank
bunch
you.
more questions that I think the consumer should know. But we're going to wrap up here. And this is Finding Your Piece of the Rock on ThinkTech Hawaii. And we have been talking with Bob Schneider, an esteemed attorney in town who has decades of experience based on his hair
Yeah.
and his age. But Bob, I will tell you, is one of the nicest men you'll ever meet, and really easy to talk to, and just a wonderful person. So thank you, Bob, for being with us, and I'm going to call you back.
Abe, thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. So let me wrap up here. Okay, so thank you for being here, folks. And thank you for the viewers watching. And please let your friends know that this will be a series every 2 weeks. And we'll have a wonderful guest speaker like Bob and others that will help us to understand the transaction when we're dealing with buyers mostly. And we'll be back every 2 weeks, folks, till I keel over. Okay. But we do have some wonderful guests lined up. And you can get onto the ThinkTechHawaii.com and you can look for shows that have aired before and be able to watch it anytime. So that's wonderful. All right. And also, if you're interested in knowing more about the real estate education process, please visit my website called abeleeseminars.com, www.abeleeseminars.com. And if you have any questions on what was covered with Bob and other guests, please feel free to call me or email me anytime.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech. Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.